This week, our attention is going to be focused on René Descartes, and you immediately, I hope, realize what's happening in relationship to this intersection of traditions in modern times. We've looked at Bacon and Hobbes from the British empiricist tradition that's developing, taking us up to about 1700. And we're now looking at Descartes, who will be followed by Spinoza and Leibniz, which will take us up to about 1700 in the continental rationalist tradition. So we're swinging over to continental philosophy. And the contrast all the way down the line works out something like this. Hobbes, as we have seen, is very plainly a nominalist, very much influenced by William of Ockham. No real universals. The only explanatory principles needed in explaining any process at all in the physical world or in human beings or in the body politic, simply efficient cause, material cause, no formal or final causes. And consequently, his nominalism gives rise to a purely empiricist kind of epistemology, in which he tries to see in good Baconian fashion what are the uniform patterns of apparent cause-effect relationship. And in contrast to that, we'll find that Descartes is not a nominalist, but a conceptualist. And of course, it's that which makes possible his rationalism, namely the kind of rationalism which maintains we have some intuitive, in a sense other than Plato's, innate knowledge of general principles, universal concepts, you see. So that he's able to get his logically universal premises as something other than empirical generalizations, because he's a conceptualist. We do have intuitive knowledge of certain universal principles. So Descartes, then, the rationalist, in that theory of knowledge, both Hobbes and Descartes have a representational view. That is to say, the consciousness is, and I say consciousness rather than mind in talking about Hobbes for obvious reasons. Okay? The consciousness is immediately aware of its ideas, which represent to it external realities. So the point is that there is a cognitive partition between our mental states and external realities, such that we don't have any direct awareness of external realities. We only know them by virtue of these representations in the consciousness, namely our ideas. Sense ideas, empirical ideas for Hobbes, but it would include, of course, intuitive ideas for Descartes. But in both cases, they have a representational theory of knowledge. Okay, that'll become very, very important. We saw it in Hobbes in terms of his distinction between primary and secondary qualities, because while the primary qualities are indeed qualities of external things, they're represented in our minds in association with secondary qualities, you see. And those secondary qualities are purely subjective representations, with no objective counterpart. So the epistemology then comes out that way. And talking of methodology, I mentioned that Hobbes' method is one that he drew from Galileo, a reconstitutive method, an attempt to restructure our understanding in form of a deductive system with empirical premises. So that's simply, if you like, a pedagogical or rhetorical way of structuring it for easy understanding and seeing of implications. There is a marked comparison between that and Descartes, because both Hobbes and Descartes want their philosophy to take the form of a deductive system. However, the pattern which Descartes is following is not that of empirical premises leading to a deductive system, but rather self-evident truths or intuitive premises, as in mathematics. So that the model for Descartes is that of a geometrical system, where you have axioms followed by deductive proofs, leading to hard and certain conclusions. Okay? And part of the reason Descartes does that is in his reaction against the skepticism that was looming up of the day. What he wanted was complete certainty, either intuitive certainty or logical certainty. And so intuitively certain premises and logically certain conclusions, by virtue of the mathematical method. And we'll open that up later on as we get into it. In the development of their philosophical beliefs, Hobbes comes out as a clear-cut materialist. Matter and motion seems to explain everything. Descartes, on the other hand, is a dualist. He wants to distinguish mind from matter and maintains that minds or souls are immaterial entities, so that a human being is a composite of two different kinds of things. A physically extended entity, matter, and a thinking entity, mind, or soul, dualism. Okay? Hobbes was a determinist. Yes, everything, including our thoughts and decisions, are causally determined. What we think is a free decision is simply our ambivalence between two conflicting drives, motives, you see, and the choice is simply coming down on one side of that oscillation. On the other hand, Descartes, with a mind, soul that has a separate status from that of body, is able to say that mind is independent of those causal mechanisms. And so Descartes asserts the freedom of the will, freedom of our choices. He's a libertarian rather than a determinist. Psychological egoism characterizes Hobbes. That is to say, our drive for survival, self-preservation, is the consuming passion. And that self-interest, then, is what drives us in everything we do. The result is that when it comes to ethics, his appeal to right reason, which was the very thing that Ockham had appealed to, the appeal to right reason is in terms of prudence and consequences. And what he speaks of as natural law is certainly not natural law grounded metaphysically in the nature of reality. It's simply the natural kind of law which humans are going to go for out of the desire for self-preservation. Namely, make peace if you want to survive. Make peace, the first rule of prudence. And that's what he calls natural law. The general ethical approach of Hobbes is a strong kind of hedonism that runs through it. Is really an Epicurean kind of ethic, if you can hark back to the Hellenistic period. Whereas we'll see that Descartes is closer to a Stoic ethic. He doesn't write systematically in ethics, but he does have a book on the passions, emotions, feelings. And his view is that our passions, our emotions, desires, are themselves good, but they can get us into a mess. In other words, he has a more positive view of human nature than Hobbes does. What the passions need is simply a little rational guidance. So it's a matter of the rule of reason over the passions, and the good naturally follows. So it's much more of a Stoic ethic. The thing that Hobbes has been working towards is this Erastian view of the relationship between church and state. That is to say that in matters where there are religious differences and controversies, where sectarianism and conflict breaks out, as in the English Civil War, what we must do is to submit to the decision of the state in that regard, and accordingly the state has authority over what is going to be a church doctrine. Now, the basics of the Christian faith are one thing. There is agreement. Existence of God, the divine Trinity, the forgiveness through Christ. But beyond basics of that sort, in order to avoid the religious conflicts that were so pervasive on the continent as well as in Britain, the church subservient to the state. That Erastian view was quite common in Britain in that day. And on the other hand, Descartes seems to have been a fairly traditional Roman Catholic in his thinking about the church. What that leaves us with, number 9, is what Hobbes thinks is philosophically significant about God, what seems to arise, though he never formulates the proof, he thinks that it's certainly persuasive at least, that God must be the first efficient cause in the whole chain of cause and effect which has produced things as we know them today. That's about all he's willing to say, philosophically. Because of his methodology, cause-effect mechanisms being unfolded, that's all he's willing to say about God. Though as a practicing broad church Anglican, he obviously seemed to believe more than that, but that on the authority of the church and the state. And he talks at length about biblical revelation. On the other hand, Descartes wants to say more. Descartes, remember, is a conceptualist, not a realist about universals. So in terms of what are the objective realities involved, he can only speak of God as efficient cause, not as formal cause, only as efficient cause. But he does want to have the picture of God which he gained from the medievals. He was educated in a Jesuit school at La Flèche, therefore was well acquainted with medieval thought, Thomas Aquinas, Duns Scotus, and so forth. And so God is not only the efficient cause, but also good. And you don't see Hobbes talking philosophically about the goodness of God. You do see Descartes talking about the goodness of God. And the reason I'll mention just in a moment. But let me pause there and see if this rundown on Hobbes refreshes your mind. Is it clear? Do you want clarification, rerun on anything there? Yes, Kristen.
What exactly is the constitutive
Okay. As the scientist gathers observational data, a mass of information, not necessarily coordinated, interpreted in terms of theory and implication, a mass of information becomes available. Now, how is that going to be organized, you see? In effect, what is happening is that the scientist's observations, experiments, analysis are taking apart the world of our ordinary experience, such as the tree with an apple falling which is going to hit Isaac Newton on the head. You see, and analysing all of that. Now, what you want, however, is a systematic theoretical understanding. So, having, as it were, taken it apart into all the particular observations, now you try to reconstitute the understanding. And you reconstitute it in terms of premises, followed by logical deductions, leading you to further conclusions. Essentially, arranging all of one's observations as premises or further inferences to show the logical interrelatedness. Okay, and then drawing further deductions. The reconstitutive method. When we get into the 19th century, there will be a subtle change in that, though it will still persist. Because in the 19th century, what develops becomes known as the hypothetico-deductive method. That is to say, the premises for the deductive reconstitution. The premises are hypotheses, whereas for Hobbes, the premises are empirical generalizations. Do you see that difference? So in a way, you have 3 ways of formulating a body of theoretical understanding in the sciences. Either empirical premises, then deductive inference, or intuitive premises, like mathematical axioms, then deductive inference, or, beginning in the 19th century, a hypothesis. And what you deduce from the hypotheses are the things you found empirically. You show that they all stem from some, what is called covering general law, a broad empirical generalization, of which your empirical findings are just particular instances. Okay, so we'll get into that when we get to John Stuart Mill next semester.
So
David.
Yes.
Yes, Bacon doesn't seem to be cued into the deductive method. You find in almost any commentary or any historical work that talks about Bacon, his need to get into mathematical methods, that's one of his lacks. The use of hypothesis is one of the differences between Bacon's methods and later inductive methods, you see. Now, the use of hypothesis comes into focus, as I was telling Kristen, in the 19th century. But mathematical methods, no, in one way, that's already operative in Descartes. Yeah. Okay. Anything else, then, about Hobbes? Then let me add a further comment about number 9, concerning God. We've talked about the breakdown of the medieval science, rooted as it was in Greek science, Pythagorean, Platonic, or Aristotelian, as the case may be. And the breakdown of that science due to, in significant measure, the rise of nominalism, the development of purely empirical methods, since there are no forms that you have to get at by other than empirical means. Now, it's been argued that there were other reasons for the movement to empirical methods than simply the rise of nominalism. Other reasons. So that a British philosopher by the name of Michael Foster, M.B. Foster, in a series of articles in the 1930s, a long time ago now, in the journal Mind, a very famous series of articles, developed this thesis, that the rise of empirical science is due to the fact that by the late Middle Ages it was recognized that if we take seriously the doctrine of creation, it follows that the nature of the physical creation is completely contingent. It doesn't have to be, and doesn't have to be the way it is. That is to say, that there is no necessary creation. If there are no fixed forms necessitating things, then what you have is the contingency of created things, as indeed William of Ockham had said. But if then you want to understand the way things are in nature, what you have to do is simply look and see. Empirical methods. However, what is going to assure us that the processes of nature will be accessible, intelligible, that our empirical methods are going to be reliable? And there again, you have some sort of theological justification that's been suggested. Alfred North Whitehead, whom we'll be reading towards in the last third of the second semester. Alfred North Whitehead, 20th century mathematician, physicist, philosopher. He argues in one place that it was confidence in the rationality of God that gave confidence in the intelligibility of God's creation. You see? Quite apart from the theory of forms, which had been the way in which God presumably gave intelligible order to the creation. But quite apart from that, granted a rational God, intelligibility of the creation. But the question still arises, not as to objective conditions, therefore, which make nature intelligible, but as to the subjective conditions, which make human rationality reliable, and which make the human senses believable. You see? Now, the one who tried to argue for the reliability of human reason and senses is Descartes. Now, if your introduction to Descartes in your introductory course was in terms of his skepticism, yes, it's still the same Descartes. He starts methodologically where the skeptic is. Skeptical about reason, skeptical about the senses. But you'll find that by the time he gets to meditation 4, he is arguing that reason is trustworthy because a good God would not deceive us by giving us faulty intellectual faculties. So it rests on the goodness of God. And when finally, in meditation 6, at the end of his meditations, he gets around to talking of sense experience, there again he pulls out the same kind of argument, that in the final analysis, our senses are reliable if we use them aright, because a good God would not deceive us by giving us unreliable senses. So the point is that Descartes is able to go beyond simply saying God is efficient cause. He's able to go beyond because of the goodness of God and talk about the reliability of human reason and the senses, and accordingly he's much more optimistic about the development of science and philosophy than the skeptics could ever have been, and certainly more confident about rational possibilities than Thomas Hobbes was. Comment? Question? There's been quite a lot of debate, discussion, about the influence of medieval thought in laying the basis for the rise of modern science. That sort of thing is discussed in the history of science at some length. There's one of our graduates who teaches in history of science up at University of Wisconsin in Madison, David Lindbergh. And Lindbergh is wary of these easy justifications. He makes the point that in the actual texts out of the medievals he doesn't find that sort of confidence expressed. Now, but the ethos is there, is part of the response. And the other thing is that it's the ethos of confidence in a divinely created world that underlies both the theory of forms, okay, and the continued confidence that people like Ockham and Bacon had in the empirical accessibility of nature to human understanding. So as long as you say it guardedly, it seems to me there's good basis there. David?
Everything that you did expect evolution to sort of scientists that kind of mentality. He was saying that Descartes argued for this that Descartes that this science of God mentality actually came about from confidence in that.
Descartes' thesis is not a historical thesis. He's not saying confidence in science arose because of.